we all talk about forgiveness as being the kind of be all end all of love. Like that's like, if you've been able to forgive, like you're really at the highest apex of love. And I would disagree with that because from what the research that I've done and, the psychological research I've integrated into this book and just my own thinking about it is that, the challenge with forgiveness is that you can't forgive someone unless you first judge them. Like forgiveness is impossible without judgment.
Hi, everybody. I am Sandy Weiner. I'm a certified dating and relationship coach. And every week I bring you expert advice and real conversations about love, connection, and healthy relationships. At Last First Date Radio, we believe it is never too late to go on your last first date. If you would like more information on any of my coaching programs for men and women, courses, or my 3 books, go to lastfirstdate.com. What is the importance of forgiving yourself and your past partners? Well, my podcast guest, Tony Silard, says that many relationships fail because we don't practice forgiveness. He is the author of Love and Suffering, and he has coached many political leaders. He has also taught leadership at various universities around the world, including lecturing at Harvard, Stanford, Georgetown, the University of California, Berkeley, George Washington University, and many more. Welcome to the show, Tony.
Thank you, Sandy. I'm honored to be here with you. Love your show.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I love this topic and I love the whole idea of forgiveness, and people get really confused about forgiveness. I know that when I first started coaching, I thought, why do you forgive people who have hurt you? You're just kind of letting them off the hook. And I didn't really understand forgiveness in the way I do now. But let's just dive into, first of all, what is forgiveness to you?
In my book, Love and Suffering, the way I write about forgiveness is that to forgive is to give for. And so let me explain that. We all have many people that we sometimes need to forgive. Like, so it could be an ex, it could be a parent, a sibling, a friend, a former friend. When we're needing to forgive, we first have to think like, what is the opposite of forgiveness? So what's our other option, right? So the other option is usually resentment, right? And resentment comes from which means again, and sentire, which is to feel. So it's to feel anger again and again and again, which paralyzes us. And so that's not a really great option. Now, when I say to forgive is to give for, it's because, well, first of all, let's think about an example where we have someone that we might need to forgive. Well, I'll give an example. I had a physically abusive stepfather, right? And so it took me a long time to forgive him for what he did, and for, when I was growing up, having a man come into my home who's not my father and who beats me up and sleeps with my mother, I didn't feel like that much of a person. So I had very low self-esteem and a very difficult time in high school. And so it took me a long time to forgive him because I felt all this resentment, but it wasn't taking me anywhere. It was paralyzing me. And it was to the point where I got so much anger inside of me that, when we have anger, we feel a lot of, resentment is just this stored up anger. We either internalize it and it manifests in all kinds of dysfunctional ways in our health and psychosomatically and in the way we're going about our lives, or we externalize it and it becomes aggression. And that also happened, where we then go out and mistreat others. And I did both of those. So at one point I went alone to Patagonia in Argentina, and I went for this long, week-long, just kind of hiking on my own. And I realized this man was what state must he have been in at that point of his life? He was unemployed, didn't feel very wanted by anyone. And so to sort of physically assault a young child, yeah, of course it wasn't the right thing to do. But the truth is, all of us have been in places where maybe we haven't gone and assaulted a young child, hopefully, but we've done things we wish we hadn't done. We haven't treated people as well as we could have. And so I think this idea, to forgive is to give for, it's recognizing that other people show up in various ways in our interaction with them, in our relationship with them. And one way may be, for example, the physical violence was a really horrible thing. But then it's not that every single thing he did was bad or wrong. And so in a way I can allow like the better elements of him to give for the worse elements. Also, for example, now I have another stepfather, and this guy is wonderful. And so in my life, I can allow the better stepfather to give for the one who was so problematic. And so I think in our lives, like forgiveness is part of saying that we don't get everything we want when we want it, but we can find ways to let the positive elements of other people and of other events and situations in our lives to give for those elements that we spent so many years resenting, but we never got anywhere doing that.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry to hear about how hard it was growing up, and I can imagine how angry anybody would be when they're beaten by a stepfather. I mean, that's supposed to be a person who keeps you safe. I've had many clients who've been sexually abused and by family members sometimes, and how do you trust again if if you're angry? Or sometimes I think they also normalize bad behaviors and sort of expect it and carry that issue with them throughout their lives, throughout all their relationships. So doing this work is so incredibly important. And also to be able to have some compassion, like you're saying, for the people who do unkind things, that often it is because of their upbringing. It's not an excuse, but it is a way to understand it and not hold on to the anger as much.
You're absolutely right. And I think when we all normalize, and the problem with that, with normalizing, well, is that first of all, we have to understand and have compassion for ourselves. Like, why do we do that? And it's because, like, if we say, well, this person is wrong for what they did, especially if that person is a family member or even a parent. I mean, in my case, it was a stepfather, and fortunately, it was just physical abuse, wasn't sexual abuse. But when it's for some people, some of my clients, it's can be like their father, their mother, an uncle, someone close to them. And especially when it's one of your own parents, it's like so difficult for us to say, well, what they did was wrong, because then our whole world is wrong, especially when we're a child. And I think as we're growing up, that's where, we as we learn to take responsibility for ourselves. One of the real themes in love and suffering is that forgiveness is a really good place to start in that journey from like suffering going toward love, but it's not a great place to stop. And let me explain why. Because forgiveness, if you really think about it, like we all talk about forgiveness as being the kind of be all end all of love. Like that's like, if you've been able to forgive, like you're really at the highest apex of love. And I would disagree with that, because from what the research that I've done, and the psychological research I've integrated into this book, and just my own thinking about it, is that the challenge with forgiveness is that you can't forgive someone unless you first judge them. Like forgiveness is impossible without judgment. Judgment comes first, and then comes forgiveness. And now think about the forgiving narrative. Like, for example, if someone says to you, Sandy, you wronged me, you really hurt me, and I forgive you for it. Like, do you want someone to say that to you? Because I certainly don't. Like that's like that to me. So forgiveness is actually on a certain level very paternalistic and patronizing. It's saying like, I hold propriety over what is right and wrong. You have done wrong. I am morally right. I hold that rectitude, and I forgive you though for what you did. So this also can be a power play where people forgive, and then they kind of hold it over the other person. And what I've realized is that we can move beyond forgiveness to gratitude. So believe it or not, I can actually be grateful for this stepfather, because this may sound strange to you, but I think if I hadn't gone through that physical abuse, if I hadn't gone through the difficulties I did as a child, if I hadn't been able to learn about what suffering means for me, and then also connect with others who are suffering, and realize that, hey, actually, um, I have suffered in certain ways, but a lot, but so has everyone else. And one of the sayings I have in my book is, don't let someone else's suffering spoil your own, because for each of us, our suffering is a guide toward what we love and who we love. And being able to have experienced that made me realize that like, for example, here I am with you, Sandy, in this wonderful podcast that you're doing. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for that suffering. Like that suffering guided me toward, essentially, if we look at the word passion, the etymology of passion, like the word passion actually, what does it mean? Like in terms of its Latin roots, the Latin roots of passion are patire or pati, P-A-T-I, which means to suffer. So we have, for example, in Christianity, we have the crucifixion, the suffering, and then the passion of Christ. In African American culture, there's the phoenix rising from the ashes, and the mythological phoenix. Like in many cultures around and religions around the world, there's this idea of passion coming out of suffering. And so, for example, I'm a leadership professor and trainer and coach. And for example, I once had this woman I was coaching who was a marketing director at a Fortune 100 pharmaceutical company, and she came to me and she said, Anthony, like, I just hate my job. Like I can't even go in there anymore. I wake up and I dread having to go to work. And so, taking a psychoanalytic approach, I asked her, well, tell me about how you grew up. Like, tell me about what's been important to you in your life. And she said, well, my childhood was really difficult. I, until I was 12 years old, my mother and I were nurturing my father until he passed away from cancer. And so there was all this suffering that I associate with growing up. I don't feel like I was able to have like a normal childhood and play with other kids and do all the things. I was just so sad all the time about what was happening at home. And so we worked on well, what kind of a career change might she want to make? And I always ask people, like, can you guess what she's doing now? And so being, as like, we all have this sort of, like, often, this the sort of a sexist idea that, like, that women are in lesser career roles. And so a lot of people say, well, she's a nurse. No, she's actually the director of a major hospital now, um, leading a team of doctors and researchers to find cures to cancer and other diseases, so fewer families suffer the way hers did. And I think it's just one example. The other I shared about the physical abuse with my stepfather. So myself, I felt powerless growing up as a child, often because of what was happening at home. I ran away. I slept in parks. It wasn't a good childhood. But now, what am I doing? My passion is to help others to feel powerful, to access the power that's rightfully theirs. I believe that most of us walk around with our hands covering our eyes, and we cry about the darkness. And what I think what you're doing, Sandy, I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, as well as what I'm trying to do, is help people remove their hands from their eyes and see the light, see the love that's in front of them, if they just are willing to slow down, stop, and recognize it.
Mm, so much good stuff here. um, I do agree with you so much that we can take our suffering and our difficult moments and turn them into gifts. And a lot of people stay in that victim spot for their whole lives. I mean, I suffered and this is just the way I am. And so I'm going to take it out on other people. And it's the only way that I can feel empathy is to see other people suffer. This is a false idea of how to process suffering. And I am like you. I took a lot of my childhood and turned it into my gift, which is we grew up in a home where communication was terrible, where there was a lot of yelling and screaming and not a good display of my parents loving each other. It was just a lot of disappointment, anger, and always blaming. And I knew I wanted better. I just didn't know what it looked like. I didn't know how to find it. But I did, as a very young child, I gravitated towards families that had peace and not chaos. There was something in my hard wiring that said, go towards peace, go find
Mm,
families that are going to soothe my nervous system. And I ended up in this field because I saw how I didn't have the skills because nobody taught me. And now that I have them, I like to teach them. And actually, when you were mentioning that woman who didn't have fun and didn't have a childhood, I thought she was going to be like in charge of an amusement park or something. I thought like, oh, she's just trying to make everybody have fun and have a childhood and be like an adult child. But instead, she took the cancer, which felt so disempowering and holding her back, and then trying to help people find a cure. So it's taking your mess and making it your message, basically.
Well, I love what you just said. It's taking your mess and making it your message. And it's when, your story, Sandy, and, growing up and feeling disappointed with the communication at home. So I've coached a lot of people around these issues. And what's interesting is that most of us, what we do, well, first of all, most of us go through life. Leaders grow through life. And so people who take what they've experienced and instead of letting it take that suffering kind of naturally transmute into pain, into anger, which is what most of us do. I like to say that pain and anger or suffering and anger are flip sides of the same coin. So what many people do, Sandy, is they take, for example, at home, I didn't feel detected. I didn't feel acknowledged. I didn't feel that there was this communication that where people actually took an interest in me and cared about me in the way I wanted to be cared about. And then what they do is that suffering becomes anger, and they say, well, who's to blame for that? And again, it's either internalize it. Well, maybe I was to blame. Maybe I wasn't a good kid, or maybe my parents were to blame. And then well, maybe they don't feel they can like lash out at their parents, or they try that at first, but then they end up lashing out at other people. And what happens is this ends up becoming this pain. It sort of naturally converts to anger, and then we say, well, who's the cause of the anger? And most of us are not willing to take responsibility and say, actually, I provoke my anger. Like have you ever heard that we are response able? We're able to choose our response,
Mm.
and so we choose how we want to, what not to react. To react is like again an action. It's like a second action. Like so, the parents that what the parents did, the first action, and then the second action, I'm going to react to it. And very few of us are able to say, I'm going to take the time to really reflect on this and find a way to make this mess my message, as you said, and let it become my passion, for what I want to change in others. And to do this requires a kind of compassion, because it's saying, just like the former client that I shared with you, she said, well, I want less families to suffer the way my family suffered in terms of her father's cancer. And you're saying, hey, I you know it wasn't fun growing up and having this communication where I didn't feel noticed. I didn't feel it really, really, really seen, and going out. So I want to go and see others, and I want to help others to see others and to see themselves. And that's the beautiful thing you're doing, Sandy. And that's what I see, is that leaders do that. They take, instead of letting their pain naturally convert into anger, they transform that pain or suffering into passion, so that fewer people will suffer the way they did. And as they're doing it, they also learn how to suffer less themselves. Like I always tell people, when people tell me about your research, I always say, well, yeah, it's research, but it's also me search. It's me trying to understand this world. And I think there's so many people today, Sandy, who feel like traditional religions are not explaining it all to them. They want something more. They want to understand. They want to understand how they should live their lives. And I'm not taking it away from the church or the synagogues or the mosques, because there are some amazing, reverends and rabbis and imams who go out and really explain how they can take these ancient scriptures and really apply them in their lives today. But many people go and they say, I need more than to like I need more than just reading some scriptures from a few thousand years ago. I need to know, like, how can I live in a more meaningful way? And that's where I feel really grateful, and sounds like you do too, Sandy, because doing this kind of research, doing this kind of writing, is it's helped me to find a better way to live, and that's what I want for others as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that suffering is essential. I think we grow the most from our most difficult times. My son had recommended this book, No Mud, No Lotus by Thich Nhat
Mm.
Hanh.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's a good example of suffering is part of life. We all suffer. And so if we feel like I'm a victim because I suffered at the hands of this person, then we're just going to be living in that resentful place. So let's talk about how to get out of it. And what is the first step in forgiveness?
Well, okay, and first I have to say that like I'm a big fan of Thich Nhat Hanh, and I've meditated with him a number of times when he was still alive,
Mm.
and just an amazing human being. And he had well, he still has his meditation center that the monks and nuns that follow him run in France. It's called Plum Village, and but it was actually at you know often it's been a number of times at one of his meditation meditation retreats that I've been able to really move forward in my own life. So please tell your son to keep on reading. uh,
Okay.
so the way I look at forgiveness and to sort of help your viewers to kind of position it is in my book Love and Suffering, I have what I call the love progression model. And the love progression model has four plateaus that culminate in love. So they're acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, and love. And then each one has an obstacle that has to be overcome in order to realize it. So to realize acceptance, we have to overcome suffering. To realize forgiveness, we have to overcome resentment, which we've already talked about. To realize gratitude, we have to overcome judgment. And then to realize a state of love in our lives, we have to overcome what I call incarceration. So, these are each one is different. They're all rooted in the latest psychological research on these themes. I guess maybe I could talk a little bit about incarceration, because that's one of the more interesting and more complex ones. But
Yeah.
also, once you get it, it's like so. Incarceration essentially is the idea that like when we're unable, and it also ties into forgiveness. So I'm not evading your question, Sandy. So when we go through a traumatic experience, and even a really challenging experiences, like growing up and not feeling there's a lot of communication in the home, like the physical abuse that I mentioned, or other things, what we often tend to do, or this woman who was managing her father's cancer her whole childhood, what we do is we say, we essentially judge the person that we feel is creating this hardship in our lives, and then we try to move as far away from them as we can. Okay, and so let me give an example. My mother had married this man who was physically abusive, and growing up with that, and it's like I was never really able to forgive her for leaving my father, because I felt like, when I was 5, they told me they were going to get divorced, my mother and father, and I said, well, you don't need to do that. I'll fix everything. Let's work on it. Of course, that didn't work. So, so I blame my mother for that, and so I judged her as being, because after she left my father, she had a number of different boyfriends, and growing up with these guys coming in and out of my life, including then this physically abusive stepfather. I think I blamed her as being unstable. And so what I thought is that I'm going to move my life, and I'm going to hang out with stable people. Just like you went towards households where you felt a sense of peace, Sandy, I
Mhm.
went toward households where I felt people were stable and consistent. And that's what I looked for in my life. And so what happens is, when we react to, again, a second action, we react to judging someone for the difficulties we've experienced. What happens is we run toward the other direction, and essentially toward the opposite. So if I judge my mother as being unstable, then I need to be stable. I need to date stable women, right? And so that's what I was doing. But then, because it wasn't really rooted in my values, it was a reaction to something from my past. Um, it's like I really wasn't able to sustain it. Like I would go out with someone who was very stable, but then I would get bored, and then I would move back towards someone who was like really really wild and unstable, like my mother, because the only love I knew, the only love most of us know, is from our first significant other, which is our parent of the opposite sex. And then over time, we try to find a new significant other. And and then what we do though is when we haven't really worked through this drama, we just replay it over and over and over again. And so many of us do that. And it could be in many different realms. Like for example, I have clients where I'm thinking of one client, for example, where she her ex cheated on her. And so she felt, okay, he was unfaithful. I need to find someone who's faithful. So she finds this guy who's very faithful, very solid. This guy is like, this guy's an accountant, just like, basically does things by the book. And she is bored out of her brain a year later. Right. And then she also starts to realize that actually at one of these meditation retreats, she starts to realize that, I've been looking for someone who's faithful and stable, but because this guy is so stable, but he's not very attentive, he's not very empathetic, he's not very compassionate, but he is stable. So because she's basically brought her whole life into this search for this one character quality, she shut herself off from everything else. And then she starts to realize, like, actually, I also want to be with someone who's empathetic, who cares about my needs, not someone who just shows up and sort of, dots the I's and crosses the T's. And so this is what happens. And this is why so many of us, for me, I didn't meet my wife until I was almost 40. I just turned 58 actually a couple days ago. We often end up in the wrong place because we end up in this incarceration where we essentially are in prison, because in a psychological prison where we just search for people to kind of rectify the past. But then because it's not rooted in our deeper, more holistic values, we end up in a place where we feel incarcerated. We feel like we've ignored the broader swath of human qualities that we need in another person. And we just focused on one, and our whole life is about, for example, someone who feels like my father never put me in private schools. He never spent money on me. So he was such a miser that person becomes really spendthrift and like goes out and very generous, but then all of a sudden, then after a while, they're in debt because they're giving away everything. And then they end up becoming just like their father and miserly. So it's like, so what I say in Love and Suffering is that whatever you judge, you already are or will become, because we end up in this incarceration where we run from it, and that's all we know. That's the love we know, and we just end up right back there with it.
Oh boy, a lot to say about that one. Yeah, I see this all the time in my practice. I mean, and in my family. I just think that, I mean, I did it for sure. I thought, well, my mother used to say, well, your father's so lazy and he doesn't do anything, and men are fill in the blank, a lot of negativity about men and emasculation. And so I thought I needed somebody who was really ambitious and somebody who would be also stable, because my father was bipolar, so somebody who was stable. Well, I married a person who ended up being none of those things, but on paper, he looked like he was. And so also lacking empathy and the ability to really work through conflict, all the things that I really needed, because I didn't know my values. And I think that you mentioned the values before, that when it's not rooted in something that's really important and foundational, then you can't build on that relationship. And it's never going to be the right relationship because you're acting in opposition to what you had. And so I see people with their faulty thinking constantly imprisoning themselves. And Lori Gottlieb in her TED Talk talked about being in prison where it's just the bars are in front of you, but the sides have always been open and you never knew that you could get out. It's like that experiment with the fly, and the fly has the top open, but the fly doesn't know that it can fly out of the jar at any time. Mm-hmm. I think that when somebody can help guide us towards other ways of looking at things and to understanding the truth of who they really are and what they really need, their whole lives shift. But if you're stuck in that place of, I'm not going to forgive that person, I'm going to go as far away from them as possible, you often end up in the same place. Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Music Unlimited. You can listen to over 70 million songs and thousands of playlists and stations. Plus, you can now stream your favorite podcasts like Last First Date Radio. You can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, on any of your devices. Get Amazon Music Unlimited for free for 30 days. Just head on over to getamazonmusic.com/last first date to learn more and claim this offer.
I wish all my podcast interviews were someone as courageously authentic as you are, Sandy. It's really this is wonderful. I mean, it to me is just one of the most beautiful things that exists on earth is that we can go through this kind of suffering as you have, as I have, and somehow we can allow it to guide us toward meaning. And I think that's the thing. Like, even if you look at the whole field of post-traumatic growth, and I do a lot of research on trauma, when you go into this field, you see that some people never really are able to work through their trauma. They like their trauma, essentially their whole lives ends up becoming that reaction to it. And then some people though are able to. They're able to like take that trauma, learn from it, and it ends up becoming a shift in their priorities, in their outlook on life, in their relationship with a higher power, if they have one, in their relationships with others. The trauma becomes a fuel, and that's what I see in you, and that's what I've experienced in my own life. And I have to say, like, I'm so grateful for it. I mean, I really have to tell you this may sound weird, but if I hadn't gone through what I did, I think I would be driving a red sports car convertible on Wall Street. I'd be having my fourth affair on my third wife. I wouldn't know my kids, and none of that characterizes me. And I also, especially as a 58-year-old man, I actually have like very connected and close relationships with male friends and women friends, as well as my wife and my children. I mean, it's not perfect. I'm not riding the horse off into the sunset, but there's a real feeling that because of what I've learned, I'm able to see how to make real connections, because I didn't have that in my life earlier, and it just adds a lot of meaning to life, and being able to have conversations with people like you about these kinds of topics, being able to write books on these themes, where there's that saying like that, the day you find the job you love is the last day you have to work. And for me, it feels like my work just feels like an extension of myself. It's what I'm doing. Like, I almost, like, even if I weren't being paid for it, I think I would do it. Maybe I would even pay people if I had the money to do this. And I think that's the thing, is that so many people, you say, I often say that work is a 4-letter word. For some people, it's CRAP or SHIT. For other people, it's for other people, it's hell. For other people, it's play. For other people, it's what Khalil Gibran, the Lebanese poet, once wrote. He said, work is love made visible. And what is more beautiful than to be doing work where this is just an extension of the love and a manifestation of the love you have for people. So I feel grateful to be in this place, and it sounds like you also experience that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I can hear your passion and your excitement and how much it brings to you. And the word that came up to me, the 4-letter word, was fuel.
Mm.
Um, that for me, that just fuels my life. It's that loop of you're helping somebody and they're helping you at the same time, and it's just such a beautiful thing. I'm learning constantly from my clients, and I also feel a sense of appreciation for how far I've come when I see how people are suffering, and I have gratitude for the life I've created. We can look at families and see 3 or 4 children who all see the family so differently, and experience the family so differently, and choose a life. They create a life in such different ways. And so I think we have choices. Not everybody is open. I mean, I have 3 children, and one of them is so completely open, constantly learning and reading, and Neville Goddard and the Thich Nhat Hanh and listening to podcasts and practicing all of these things, both mind, body, spirit. And then I have two daughters who are a little slower in their progress and put up a lot of guards. And I have to be patient with them and know that they're not there yet. And as long as I keep trying to be authentic with them and get curious with them and appreciate who they are. But it is a challenge, when you want so much more, especially for your loved ones. I don't know. How many kids do you have?
Two, and they're 12 and 9, and I can relate a lot to what you're saying. I mean, in many ways, when I'm working on a book, or even when I'm giving a keynote, it's kind of like I'm in control. Like I can decide on what I'm going to write or say or not say. And being a dad, I got to say, I mean, it's very humbling and it's very sobering. And it's ironic because I teach leadership, but I feel more like a servant at home. Like it's kind of like there's so many needs around, and I feel like I'm trying to attune to everyone and make sure everyone's getting what they need. And and some days better than others, right, Sandy? I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
and one thing that's challenging about it is that your children, they they're gonna live their lives the way they want to live it, right? And we end up like, I'm I like this concept that when our one of the largest, most significant challenges for parents is that when our children are really young, like 4, 5, 7, 8 years old, like like we are managing their lives, but basically they end up firing us as their managers as they become teenagers. And so then it's a lot of that humility, like really being able to say, okay, well, I'm here for you. I'm here, like instead of trying to guide them for what they ought to do, more kind of being like a coach. like
Mhm.
so tell me, you want to, you'd like, the research shows, like, to be able to feel productive in life and do well, you want to get about 9 hours of sleep as a teenager. So you've got, you want to go to bed at 11, and you're going to get up at 6. And so how is that going to work? And like, what's basically, like, for you to be able to achieve your own goals with school and with your friends and with life, and enjoy the life you're living, like, what's your plan? How are you going to go about it? And just kind of being there to listen, and when they're open to it, it's kind of like the window opens a little bit once in a while where they are ready to hear some advice, and you got to be present and ready. Actually, Thich Nhat Hanh, he once I once saw him speak at the Warner Theater in Washington, D.C. He had 10,000 people there, and he asked the crowd, he said, what's the greatest thing you can give to the person you love? And everyone is silent. And he said, to be fully present.
Yep.
And so I really think it's this kind of presence. And again, I think one of the biggest challenges we face is just not getting down on ourselves when we don't show up the way we'd like to. There's I often read this Indian sage. His name is Vivekananda. He was the first Indian to bring Hinduism to the West in the late 19th century, and he often says, that we extend from the center and return to the center. And most of us have extended, we extend, we extend, we keep extending. We're on our phones and our screens all the time. We're extending, extending, extending. So it's just kind of like what your son is doing by reading, No Mud, No Lotus. It's like returning to his center, returning to our center over and over and over again. And tomorrow's always a new day. And we just sometimes have to say, okay, I don't like the way I parented today. And all right, I want to do it differently tomorrow. And we start again.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, as a grandmother, I have three grandkids, and the 5-year-old spent time with me today alone, and it was so sweet. And I let him kind of guide what we were going to do together with a little bit of discipline, but mostly, we're going to go here, and what would you like to do? And one thing my daughter has told me on this recent trip, because she lives in Israel, so she's far away.
Mm.
And she said, she really appreciates when I'm present. She can feel it. And so as a mother, getting a second chance as a grandmother to now come with more wisdom, and I have the ability to give the kids back. Um, so I don't have to experience
Mm.
all the hard things as much. I love the ability to be a guide to the grandkids, to show up more fully for my children as well. And there is something really just so heartwarming about that.
I love what you said, and what your grandchild said about you're just being present. I think it reminds me of there was this competition in this Midwestern town for who could be like the citizen of the year, and they ended up deciding on this 7-year-old boy, because this old this man who was in his 60s had lost his wife, and this young boy really helped. It was his neighbor, and the young boy would just helped him this man through it. And so they interviewed him at the local newspaper, and they said, "Well, how did you do it?" And he said, "Well, I just sat with him and let him cry,
Mm.
you know." And so it's like also, especially, this idea of like the like us, in these professions, we're writing, coaching, training, helping people. A lot of it is it's just being present, like you said, and it's just being there. Um,
Yeah.
and and I think the reality, and I think why relationships are so challenging for people and for most of us, especially intimate relationships, is because they kind of hold up a mirror to the soul. And so just being present with another human being, and allowing that intimacy to unfold is really difficult for people. And I think especially today, in our sort of technologically accelerated society where so many of us are behind our screens, so many feel social anxiety about stepping out from behind their screens and actually being seen by another human being. But it's that kind of connection that helps us through and helps us to work through the challenges, the trauma we experienced earlier in life, and be able to feel whole again.
Yeah. And to
Yeah.
recognize this is my trauma. This is not necessarily something the other person did, but I got triggered by something they did or said, and taking responsibility. We've mentioned that many, many times in
Hmm.
this talk today. Responsibility, humility, just let me put my ego aside for a minute, and what can I do to make things better? And am I overreacting? What is going on for me? And I've seen it with the couples I've worked with who get into a disagreement and they're able to identify this is a me thing. I overreacted. I wasn't aware that my tone was off. Just being able to say that and do that is so incredibly healing. Um, but we are coming to the end here, and I would love to ask you the question I ask everyone, which is, what are your final words of advice for anyone who wants to go on their last first date?
Okay, so this is just such a great question. I got to say, in preparing for this podcast, I've asked at least 3 or 4 friends, like, okay, so what would you say? How do you go on your last first date, right? And so I've been thinking about it a lot, Sandy. And I mean, I think vis-a-vis this discussion we've been having, is that if you want to meet the right person, you first have to become the right person. So and it's interesting because we live in this kind of consumer society where it's all about like, what can I have, right? And especially now, I imagine most of your viewers have also tried online dating, and there's just so many options, so many choices. It's kind of like a tyranny of riches, like Barry Schwartz's book, The Paradox of Choice. It's almost like we become overwhelmed because there's so many options out there. But I think what we end up doing is we think we're seeing all these different people, but we're just seeing ourselves over and over and over again,
Mm.
because we haven't worked through these issues. We haven't worked through these past traumas. And so it's kind of like, uh, I think, yes, the other person really matters. Like, it's also like, certainly the uniqueness of who my wife is like, I am so indebted to her, because I don't know if I would have come out of the sort of the mess that my single life was without meeting her. I wouldn't have. I probably. Um, at the same time, it's like I think about who I was as I Like, so when my wife and I actually didn't work out at first. Like we went out for 2 years. She left me 3 times, and I said, okay, no more. Right. And then I went to one of Thich Nhat Hanh's retreats, actually in Estes Park, Colorado. And I remember being there, and I'm staying in this like kind of trailer with like makeshift trailer with like 9 other guys in bunk beds. And I don't know anybody. And I go for this long walk out of the mountains, Colorado, and and I was there in the middle of nothing. And that's when it hit me. I said to myself, I cannot be abandoned. I can no longer be abandoned. I'm not a child anymore. Like a grown man can't be abandoned. Their relationships have their birth, growth, decay, and death. And and this is where I am. And so it's interesting because my wife and I finally came back together. At the time, I didn't know she was going to be my wife. And and because of getting out of this incarceration that we've been talking about, like instead of judging her for having left me or judging her for being unstable, again, just like my mother, as I mentioned before, I realized like, well, actually, she's got a completely different narrative about this. She left being running a psychology clinic in Mexico to coming to the U.S. I didn't want us to live together or get married yet because I wanted to make sure we were going out for at least 2 years so we'd be stable. Because remember, that's what I judged my life on. And but it never got to 2 years because she kept leaving me. And so when we finally came back together, it was like I I wasn't judging her anymore. We came back together, and it was like we I said to her before, when we saw each other after like a year and a half of absence, I was like, I still love you. I love you. And then I said to her, well, you loved me before, but you weren't getting what you needed. Let's talk about that. And we sat down and we agreed that in the next, if things were going well, in the next 6 months, we would get engaged. And within a year of that, we would get married. So now we had a plan. 2 months later, we were engaged. 6 months after that, we were married. That was 15 years ago. And so I just can't emphasize enough that, it's really that the only way out is through. Like there's so much media out there trying to pull you in, like focusing on like your clothes and your money and the other person having all the right looks and money. Look, if you're a woman, it's not what he drives, it's what drives him. If you're a man, it's not how she looks, it's how she looks at you. So it's really like transcending this attachment we have to the external, letting go of that and connecting with the internal, first within yourself and then within another human being.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing your love story. It's usually not a straight line. I have seen that in my practice and in my life, that love can be a very unlinear. And it's often in those moments. I mean, I have a couple that I worked with who just got engaged, and they were totally locked on one thing. And I'm actually going to bring them onto the podcast to tell their story. But probably about 6 months into the relationship, she said, I think our finances are too far apart and we'll never see eye to eye on finance. And so I think I have to break up with him. I'm going to hire you again for another 6 months. Put me back online. I'm going back. And I was just like, how about we have a conversation before you do that? And they have been able to work it through. And in our last session, which was the day that they got engaged that night, we talked about finances. And I said, you're looking at it from one perspective, which is until you make as much or more than she does, you will not be able to move forward. You can also look at contribution in another way. And how might that look? And all of a sudden it opened up, well, here's how I contribute and here's how I contribute. Because they would have waited forever for him to keep rebuilding wealth. He was moving in the right direction, but why put that marker as the most important thing? And so they were able to unlock this roadblock. And then a couple hours later, I get this picture. Look what happened tonight. And she's showing me her engagement ring. I didn't even know they were thinking of marriage because this will be the third time for her. So it's, it was not simple. And it was a lot of questions and a lot of conversations and a lot of working through really painful things. But I know that yes that she gave him was 100% yes. It was not a hesitation. It was, she said it was the most yes, the most confident yes I've ever given to any man. And so they have the foundation of being able to work through anything, and they are kind to each other and considerate of each other, and they talk about it. They don't bury the stuff that's important. And I think that's just so key. And both of them are still working separately on themselves, which is also really important.
Well, it sounds like you helped them, Sandy, through that phase of judgment and, and incarceration. Like it's like financially solvent or financially insolvent, and that's it. And everything else and the rest of the human being is kind of collapses into that one character quality. And yeah, and that just puts us in prison, as we talked about.
Yeah.
So, well, let me offer two free books to your
Oh,
viewers, if that's okay.
thank you.
Um,
Yeah.
so, 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 so one is called the Myth of Happiness: how your definition of happiness creates your unhappiness, and the second is the Myth of Friendship: how your misunderstandings about friendship keep you lonely. A lot of it's about friendship and happiness, but it also relates a lot to intimate relationships. And for example, one of the myths in the book about friendship is that we should become friends with we should focus on finding someone we like to become friends with. You could also extrapolate that to finding an intimate partner. You want to find an intimate partner who you like. And I would say that, well, that's just a part of it. You want to find an intimate partner who you like and want to be like. You want to
Mm.
find an intimate partner who actually is better than you in a certain dimension of the human experience, and you're better than them in another dimension. And so, for example, maybe for example, this woman you're talking about, maybe she's the real financial planner, right? And like she keeps things really planned out, or maybe she's the vacation taskmaster and plans out the vacations. But maybe he's like he's really good at something else. Like he's really good at for example at making her laugh and having a sense of humor and seeing the light side of life. So we always we have these, as you said, the mess becomes the message. Also, it's like the voids in us become our vision of the kind of life we want to live, because we want to avoid those. And any rate, so if your viewers are interested, you can download these two books. You just go to theartoflivingfree.org. Again, theartoflivingfree.org, and then /free happiness and friendship books. So theartoflivingfree.org/free happiness and friendship books. And yeah, at any rate, and of course, if you're interested in love and suffering, you can find it on Amazon, and I hope you enjoy it. And Sandy, thank you so much for having me here. This has been fantastic.
Oh, I enjoyed it so much. I mean, this kind of conversation just it lights me up as much as, it hopefully will bring so much joy to our audience. We just touched on such important topics, and I just feel your passion and your evolution, really. It just shows in your leadership. And I think just striving to overcome our trauma and forgive people in our past instead of carrying it with us is such an important thing. And it helps us in every single relationship we have, starting with the relationship with ourselves. So thank you again, Tony, for a wonderful, wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Sandy. You give me a lot to think about. I really appreciate your time and all your authentic sharing today.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for listening. If you love our show, please give us a high rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And you can leave a comment on Spotify. I do read them and will respond to them. And as always, here's to your last first date.
Mhm.
If you are ready to get unstuck, gain new tools, become more empowered, and finally find your last first date, I'd love to talk to you. Fill out an application to be considered for a complimentary half-hour love breakthrough session at lastfirstdate.com/application.